Welcome everybody to another episode of Advertisers Watching Ads, the weekly show where we invite brands to review other brands' ads.
You know, there is humour to be had in this conversation. So I think there's that element to talking about death, is you don't want to jinx it. And then I think the advert touches on that very well as well.
Has this actually inspired anybody to do something? Because I'll speak for myself and I'm still like, yeah, that's such a good idea. I'm not going to do it.
And maybe while you're doing something else can be just enough a distraction to make it not as painful.
Thank you to Contagious, as always, for picking this week's ads. Before we get into them, I will introduce our guests.
Hi, everyone. I'm Julie Pender, and I'm a marketer who works in drinks.
Hi, everyone. My name is Hayley Krasnow. I'm an associate brand manager based out of Nashville, Tennessee, and I work on a popular pet food brand. Happy to be here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nick. My FMCG background was at L'Oreal, where I was a brand manager for 5 years, and since then have founded and exited startups.
Brilliant. Yeah, this week's ad is slightly different to usual, so I'm going to get straight into it. It is Co-op Funeralcare, and talking now helps your loved ones later.
You ever thought about yours?
Funeral? Yeah. I'm going to have one big party.
Flowers, service.
Flashy black hearse, black ties.
I want to go on one of them.
I think I want to be buried with these.
Well, that's unusual.
Everyone there. The more the merrier.
Even your ex, Mark?
He was my north, my south, my east.
Scatter you where?
I think here.
I suppose it would be greener to just be buried in the shroud, really.
At one with the earth, with the slugs and the worms.
And I want dancing, and I want laughter.
It's your day. You have what you want.
I like the sound of it.
It makes sense, doesn't it?
What about you with your ex, Sue?
Which one?
For help starting your conversation, visit Co-op Funeralcare.
So we are going to start with votes out of 5. What would you vote this ad? No 5s. Interesting.
This Co-op Funeral Care company, which just I am not very familiar with it, just based in the US, talking about making those conversations much earlier when you don't necessarily need to have them later in life. You're helping your family members, you're helping your loved ones by having conversations early about, what you want as end of life is approaching you. So you can sympathize with a lot of people that is a conversation you want to procrastinate. You don't want to talk about it. It's awkward. It's also just very sad, and it's just not something that you really want to discuss further. So having this ad kind of brings to light the discussion that these situations can happen early and often, and it also could happen across a lot of different scenarios.
I thought they brought it in very nicely with a real sense of grounding, very British humour to it as well. And the Co-op as a company is, it's all about helping your community and everyone around you. And I thought they got that across quite nicely. And it's that type of advert for me can become very cheesy, corny, and make you roll your eyes. But I feel in that the way they did it, it didn't come across like that at all. And it actually felt quite heartwarming.
I like the way they executed it. I think it was done with quite a bit of appropriate level of respect. They did a very good job of having a diverse demographic. The touch of humor was actually brilliant. The part that I find intriguing, so I am a Canadian based in London, the part that still intrigues me about brands here in the UK is that Co-op is actually known to me as my local grocery store. I'm intrigued from a brand point of view about what does Co-op stand for from a consumer point of view, and how much of this is about Co-op total brand building and Co-op having awareness of this. How often do you buy a funeral? For yourself, I'm going to guess most people don't. It would be very interesting to see some insight in terms of how people approach their own mortality and their own death. But then who makes the decision? Who's the influencer in this kind of purchase cycle? That is a terrible way to talk about this kind of really big life event. But it intrigues me. And the Co-op part of that, I didn't know Co-op did funeral care until I watched that ad. So now I'm aware. They drove awareness for me.
So I went on their website and I thought there was 2 great things. So obviously they have a conversation starter of how to get these conversations started, with your loved ones. I did think it was not a lot of information, but it was very short and concise. But there was an area, and I'm not really sure how first party data exchange works in the UK. However, there was a conversation starter where you, as possibly the consumer, could write down your funeral wishes and then either email it to yourself or possibly a loved one, just to start that conversation. So it gives you a moment to sit down, reflect, think about what you want, put it in writing. That may be a great way to start a conversation, or just to say, hey, I'm throwing this in your inbox, reference it when you need it later. So I actually really liked that, but I do think they need a little bit bigger call to action on their website to get people to use that. But I did think it was a good way to at least start the conversation.
It's just like a wholesome topic. Who can watch that ad and go, oh, we definitely shouldn't talk about this. You shouldn't talk about this. I think everybody looks at this and goes, yeah, I probably need to have this conversation with somebody in my life, either about myself or about my family members. Is anybody going to go and start a conversation? But has this actually inspired anybody to do something? Because I'll speak for myself, and I'm still like, yeah, that's such a good idea. I'm not going to do it.
It's funny you say that, because the conversation I've had recently with my mum, who loved traveling to India. She's quite spiritual. And she said, okay, well, when I pass, I want my ashes scattered in the Ganges. And I was like, really? Can we not do the River Thames? Can I FedEx you out to India? I was like, does it have to be the Ganges of all the rivers? There is humour to be had in this conversation. Personally, I don't necessarily like talking about it, because it's almost like you're jinxing it. I feel like you're back at school. So you're like, okay, well, if we're going to talk about death, it's going to happen sooner rather than later. So I think there's that element to talking about death, is you don't want to jinx it, which is pretty stupid, I think, in the grand scheme of things. But yeah, I think there is definitely humour to be had in that conversation. And I think the advert touches on that very well as well.
Another thing that I feel like has been a little bit of a trend on either social media or just sometimes that, you talk with friends, there is a little bit of a joking element, though, when you think about, or when you start talking about your funeral, right? So you're thinking, this is my last final party. I don't want anything sad. I want everyone to have an actual celebration of life, but, only remember the happy times. It's one of those things, though, that it's I feel like we've all kind of jokingly talked about it. It's something that I know that I need to do with my parents. I just don't want to. But you're also thinking some of these scenarios, I had not really thought about, bringing it up while shopping or bringing it up while hiking. So I do think it at least starts you thinking about it and needing to have the conversation. And maybe while you're doing something else can be just enough a distraction to make it not as painful.
I think the older you get, dealing with your mortality becomes a little bit harder. And I love that they're inspiring it, because I think it's actually a great conversation to have. Don't wait for the crisis. When it happens, you then have to try and anticipate. And for me, it's a similar conversation about organ donation. These are all these really kind of emotional, highly kind of controversial topics that people don't want to discuss and they'd rather avoid. There's this, I think, a demographic reality in terms of where there's quite a bit of money as well in terms of targeting. And there was a huge hype around millennials and a lot of kind of surface descriptions of how to target millennials, Gen Z. And now I think we're peeling back that onion and getting a lot more consumer insight and a lot more rich data to understand it. I think there's a huge amount of conversations going on in workplaces, even talking about menopause, all these really taboo subjects that we're starting to break open. And having Co-op do that in a way that is, I think, really done with respect and in the right tone. It's really well done.
When, big FMCGs try and have this conversation, it can come across as quite inauthentic. But I think the brand of Co-op fits very nicely with the tone they offered in that advert. I see that they did, a lot of online content around this space as well. They provided a lot of content around the actual core product of paying for a funeral. That's probably the only downside, is they don't point you towards their website. But maybe to learn more about grief or something, please visit our website. Maybe could have been the only addition that I would have said, because there's some great content on their site about that.
Last one, if you were the brand manager involved in this, or the team, would you sign it off in its current format, maybe with some changes, or definitely not approved? All right. Well, thank you all for joining us. We'll be back next week with more ads. But until then, thank you to our guests, and we'll speak soon.